Michelle Obama stepped out of the black SUV and felt the familiar weight of hundreds of eyes watching her every move. The White House lawn stretched before her, perfectly manicured as always, but today something felt different. The usual hustle and bustle of staff members seemed quieter, more respectful than normal. She had just returned from a difficult trip to a children's hospital in Chicago. The images of sick children still played in her mind like a movie she couldn't turn off. Some of those kids were so young, so brave, fighting battles that would make grown adults cry. She had held their small hands, listened to their stories, and promised to remember them always. As she walked toward the entrance, Michelle noticed a young guard standing at attention near the door. He couldn't have been more than 25 years old, with kind eyes and a respectful posture that reminded her of her own son's friends. His uniform was perfectly pressed, and his shoes shined like mirrors in the afternoon sun. The guard had been watching her approach, and something in his expression caught her attention. It wasn't the usual formal politeness she was used to seeing from White House staff. There was something deeper there, something that seemed to recognize the heaviness she was carrying. Michelle had been First Lady for several years now, and she thought she had seen everything. She had met world leaders, given countless speeches, and handled situations that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. But lately the weight of everything seemed to be getting heavier. The responsibilities, the constant public attention, and especially the heartbreaking moments like today's hospital visit were taking their toll. She tried her best to stay strong for everyone who looked up to her, but sometimes she wondered if anyone really understood how hard it could be. As she got closer to the entrance, the young guard stepped forward slightly. Michelle expected the usual formal greeting, maybe a polite "Good afternoon, Mrs. Obama," or a simple nod of acknowledgement. She had her own polite smile ready, the one she had perfected over years of public appearances. But something in the guard's eyes told her this moment was going to be different. There was a gentleness there, an understanding that seemed to go beyond his years. He looked like he wanted to say something, but was carefully choosing his words. Michelle slowed her pace slightly, giving him the opportunity to speak if he wanted to. After all the formal interactions and carefully scripted conversations of her day, she found herself curious about what this young man might have to say. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world had gotten a little quieter. Michelle could hear the distant sounds of traffic beyond the White House gates. But here in this moment, everything seemed to pause. She could see that the guard was nervous but also determined. His hands remained professionally at his sides, but there was something in his posture that suggested he had something important he wanted to share. Michelle had learned to read people over the years, and this young man clearly had something weighing on his heart. As she reached the entrance, she slowed to a complete stop and looked directly at him, giving him her full attention. It was a small gesture, but one that said she was willing to listen to whatever he had to say. The guard took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for something he had been thinking about for a long time. The young guard cleared his throat softly and looked directly into Michelle's eyes. "Mrs. Obama," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I wanted you to know something." Michelle nodded encouragingly, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Most people who spoke to her in official settings sounded rehearsed or nervous. But this young man seemed to be speaking straight from his heart. "I've been working here for 2 years now," he continued, "and I've watched you come and go hundreds of times. I've seen you after the happy events and the difficult ones. I've noticed when you're tired and when you're carrying something heavy on your shoulders." Michelle felt a flutter of surprise. She had always tried so hard to maintain her composure in public, to never let anyone see when she was struggling. The idea that someone had been observing her so carefully, and with such kindness, was both touching and a little overwhelming. The guard continued, his voice growing more confident. "My name is David, and I lost my mother 3 years ago. He was everything to me, and watching her battle cancer was the hardest thing I've ever been through." Michelle's expression softened immediately. She could hear the pain in his voice, but also the strength that comes from surviving something terrible and finding meaning in it. "Before she died," David said, "my mother told me something I'll never forget. She said that the people who carry the heaviest burdens are often the ones who spend their time trying to make life easier for everyone else. She said those people need to know that someone sees their sacrifice. The words hit Michelle like a gentle wave, unexpected, but somehow exactly what she needed to hear. She had been feeling so alone in her struggles, so isolated by the unique challenges of her position. David took a small step closer, his professional demeanor never wavering, but his eyes filled with warmth. "Mrs. Obama, I see how hard you work. I see how you put your whole heart into everything you do, especially when it involves helping children and families who are hurting." Michelle felt her throat tighten. She had spent the morning holding sick. Children, promising their parents that people in power cared about them, trying to be a source of hope when she sometimes felt hopeless herself. "I was here the day you came back from visiting those families who lost their homes in the tornado," David continued. "I saw you sit in your car for 5 minutes before getting out, and I could tell you were trying to pull yourself together. I wanted to tell you then what I'm telling you now." Michelle's eyes began to fill with tears, but she kept listening. There was something about this young man's words that felt like medicine for wounds she didn't even realize she had. "You don't have to carry it all alone," David said simply. "My mother taught me that even the strongest people need to know that someone understands what they're going through. She said that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is just acknowledge their pain and tell them they're not invisible." The tears that had been threatening to fall finally spilled over onto Michelle's cheeks. For so long, she had felt like she had to be perfect, had to be strong for everyone all the time. The idea that someone had been watching her with such compassion, rather than judgment, was almost more kindness than she knew how to handle. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. His hands trembled slightly as he held it out to Michelle. "My mother wrote this for me before she passed away," he said. "She told me to give it to someone who needed to hear these words when the time felt right. I've been carrying it for 3 years, waiting for that moment."
Ow.
Michelle looked at the worn piece of paper, clearly handled with care over the years. She could see that it had been folded and unfolded many times, as if David had read it over and over during his most difficult moments. "She made me promise to give this to someone who was making a real difference in the world, someone who was sacrificing their own peace to help others find theirs," David explained. "Every day, I watch you carry the weight of so many people's hopes and fears, and I know my mother would want you to have her words." With shaking hands, Michelle took the paper. As she unfolded it, she could see the careful handwriting of someone who had put deep thought into every word. The ink was slightly faded, but the message was clear and strong. The note read, "To whoever David gives this to, you are seen. Your sacrifices matter. The world is better because you choose to care, even when caring hurts. When you feel alone in your struggles, remember that there are people like my son who notice your strength and are inspired by your courage. You are making a difference in ways you may never know. Rest when you need to. Cry when you need to. You are human, and that's what makes your kindness so powerful. With love and respect, Helen Morrison." Michelle read the note twice, tears flowing freely now, and the words seemed to speak directly to every doubt and fear she had been carrying. Helen Morrison had never met her, but somehow her words felt like they were written specifically for this moment. For this day when Michelle needed them most, David watched quietly as Michelle absorbed his mother's message. "She always said that the people who help others heal are often the ones who need healing themselves," he said softly. "She would want you to know that it's okay to not be okay sometimes." Michelle looked up at David through her tears. "How did you know?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know I needed to hear this today?" David's eyes filled with understanding. "'Cause you looked the same way my mother did when she was trying to be strong for everyone else," he replied. "She taught me that sometimes the bravest people are the ones who smile through their pain so others don't have to worry." Michelle wiped her eyes and looked at the note again. The simple words carried such power, such truth. She had been so focused on being what everyone else needed that she had forgotten to acknowledge her own need for compassion and understanding. "Your mother sounds like she was an incredible woman," Michelle said, her voice thick with emotion. David nodded. "She was. She always said that kindness was the most important thing a person could give to the world. She would be so honored to know that her words reached you." Michelle carefully folded the note and held it close to her heart. "I will treasure this," she said. "I will remember her words whenever I start to feel like I'm carrying too much." Alone. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting a golden light across the White House lawn. For a moment, Michelle felt lighter than she had in months. The burden hadn't disappeared, but somehow it felt more manageable knowing that someone understood the weight of it. Michelle stood there for a long moment, holding the precious note and trying to process everything that had just happened. David remained respectfully quiet, giving her the space she needed to absorb his mother's words and the kindness he had shown her. "David," Michelle finally said, looking at him with new eyes, "you have no idea what this means to me. I came back from the hospital today feeling so heavy, so overwhelmed by all the pain I saw. I was wondering if anything I do really makes a difference." David's expression grew even more gentle. "Mrs. Obama, if I may," he said carefully, "I've watched families leave here after meeting with you. I've seen the hope in their eyes, the way they stand a little taller after spending time with you. You might not see it, but your care changes people." Michelle thought about the children she had visited that morning. Their faces had lit up when she walked into their rooms. Their parents had hugged her with tears in their eyes, thanking her for taking the time to see their kids, to acknowledge their struggles, to make them feel important. "There was a little girl today," Michelle said, her voice soft with memory. "She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She was so sick, but when I sat with her, she told me about her dreams of becoming a teacher. She asked me if I thought she could still do that, even after being sick." David listened intently, his face showing the kind of compassion that reminded Michelle why his mother's words had touched her so deeply. "I told her absolutely," Michelle continued. "But when I left her room, I wondered if I was giving false hope. What if she doesn't make it? What if I promise something that can't happen?" David shook his head slowly. "My mother spent 6 months in the hospital," he said. "She met a lot of sick kids during that time. She always said that hope isn't about promising specific outcomes. It's about reminding people that their dreams matter, that they matter regardless of what happens." Michelle felt fresh tears welling up. "That little girl smiled for the first time in weeks when we talked about her dream," she remembered. "Her mother told me later that it was the first time in months that her daughter had talked about the future. Then you gave her exactly what she needed," David said with quiet confidence. "You gave her permission to hope, to dream, to believe that her life has meaning beyond her illness. That's not false hope, Mrs. Obama. That's the most real kind of hope there is." Michelle looked down at the note in her hands again. Helene Morrison's words seemed even more powerful now, as if they were helping her see her own actions through clearer eyes. "I think I've been so afraid of not being enough," Michelle admitted, "that I forgot to see what I was actually giving people. I've been focusing on all the problems I can't solve instead of celebrating the moments when I can offer comfort." David smiled, the first full smile she had seen from him during their conversation. "My mother always said that we don't have to fix everything to make a difference. Sometimes just showing up, just caring, just letting people know they're not forgotten, that's everything." Michelle felt something shift inside her chest, like a tight knot was finally beginning to loosen. The weight she had been carrying hadn't disappeared, but it felt different now, shared, understood. "David," she said, "I want you to know that your mother raised an extraordinary son. The kindness you've shown me today, the way you've honored her memory by sharing her wisdom, it's exactly the kind of goodness the world needs more of." David's eyes glistened with pride and emotion. "She would be so happy to know that her words helped you," he said. "She always believed that love keeps working in the world even after we're gone." As Michelle wiped her eyes and composed herself, she felt a profound shift in how she viewed not just this day, but her entire role as First Lady. David's simple act of kindness had reminded her of something she had somehow forgotten in all the complexity of her position. "You know," Michelle said, looking at David with genuine curiosity, "what made you decide to speak up today? You could have just let me walk by like any other day?" David considered the question carefully. "Honestly, I almost did," he admitted. "I've thought about giving someone that note dozens of times over the past 3 years. But every time, something held me back. Today was different, though. When I saw you walking up from the car, you looked exactly like my mother did on her hardest days, trying so hard to be strong for everyone else that you forgot to be gentle with yourself." Michelle nodded, recognizing the truth in his observation. "I do that a lot," she said quietly. "I think it comes with the territory of being in a position where people look to you for strength and hope." "My mother struggled with that too," David said. "She was a social worker before she got sick. She spent her whole career helping families in crisis, and she would come home emotionally drained, but never wanted to burden anyone with her own struggles." Michelle felt a deep connection to Helen Morrison, a woman she had never met, but whose wisdom was now changing her perspective. "How did she learn to balance it?" she asked. David smiled at the memory. "It took her a long time, and honestly, she never perfected it. But she finally realized that taking care of herself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. She said you can't pour from an empty cup, and that acknowledging your own pain doesn't make you weak, it makes you real." Michelle thought about all the times she had pushed through exhaustion, sadness, or overwhelm because she felt like she had to be an example of strength. "I think I've been afraid that if people see me struggle, they'll lose faith in what we're trying to accomplish," she confessed. "Mrs. Obama," David said, with gentle firmness. "Respectfully, I think it's the opposite. When people see that someone they admire is human enough to struggle and still chooses to keep helping others, it gives them permission to be human too." The words hit Michelle like a revelation. She thought about all the people she had met over the years. The mothers who had thanked her for being real. The young women who had told her they appreciated seeing a first lady who wasn't afraid to show emotion. "You might be right about that," Michelle said, a small smile breaking through her tears. "Some of my most meaningful interactions have been the ones where I let my guard down a little." David nodded enthusiastically. "My mother always said that. People don't need heroes who never fall down. They need heroes who get back up and keep going, who show them that it's possible to face hard things and still choose love." Michelle looked at the note one more time, then carefully placed it in her purse. "I'm going to read this every day," she said. "And I'm going to try to remember that being human doesn't make me less capable of helping others. It might actually make me better at it." "She would love that," David said, his voice thick with emotion. She always said her biggest hope was that her words would outlive her and keep helping people long after she was gone. Michelle felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a sense of connection, not just to David and his mother, but to something larger, to all the people who choose kindness, even when they're struggling, who offer hope even when they need it themselves. "David, I have one more question for you," Michelle said. "What would your mother want you to know right now, seeing how you've honored her memory today?" David paused, clearly moved by the question. "She would want me to know that love always finds a way to keep working in the world," he said softly. "And that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply see each other." 3 months later, Michelle stood in the same spot on the White House lawn, but everything felt different. She had just returned from another hospital visit, this time to see the little girl who had dreamed of becoming a teacher. The child was doing much better, and her first words when Michelle walked in were, "I'm still planning to be a teacher, and I'm going to tell my students about the day the First Lady believed in my dreams." David was at his usual post, and when he saw Michelle approaching, his face lit up with a knowing smile. Over the past months, their brief exchanges had become a bright spot in both of their days. Michelle had taken to stopping for a few minutes. Whenever she saw him, sharing updates about the people she had met and the progress being made on various initiatives. "Good afternoon, David," Michelle said warmly as she reached the entrance. "I have something to tell you that I think your mother would have loved to hear." David's eyes brightened with interest. "What's that, Mrs. Obama? Remember that little girl I told you about, the one who wanted to be a teacher?" Michelle asked. David nodded immediately. He had been asking about her progress regularly. "Well, she's doing much better, and today she told me something beautiful. She said that our conversation helped her realize that being sick doesn't change who she is inside. It just makes her stronger." David's face broke into a huge smile. "That's exactly what my mother would have said," he replied. "She always believed that our struggles don't define our limits. They reveal our strength." Michelle reached into her purse and pulled out Helen Morrison's note. which had indeed become a daily source of comfort and wisdom. "I've been thinking about what your mother wrote, about how we're making a difference in ways we may never know," she said. "I realize now that she was right, but it works both ways." David looked puzzled, so Michelle continued. "You had no idea that day how much I needed those words, how much they would change my entire perspective on this job and on myself. Your kindness, your mother's wisdom, they've been rippling out in ways you'll never fully know." David's eyes filled with tears as he understood what she was saying. "She always said that kindness creates circles that keep getting bigger," he said quietly. "It does," Michelle agreed. "I've been carrying her words with me to every hospital, every school, every meeting with families in crisis. When I start to feel overwhelmed, I remember what she wrote about being human, making our kindness more powerful, not less. It's changed how I connect with people." Michelle paused and looked directly at David. "But more than that, you've taught me something your mother would be proud of. You've shown me that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply witness each other's struggles with compassion." David wiped his eyes, clearly moved. She would be so honored to know that her words traveled so far and helped so many people. Michelle smiled through her own tears. "David, I want you to know that I've started something new because of what you and your mother taught me. We're creating support groups for the staff here at the White House, a place where people who spend their days taking care of others can talk about their own struggles and know they're not alone." David's face showed amazement. "Really, really?" Michelle confirmed. "Because your mother was right. The people who carry the heaviest burdens are often the ones trying to make life easier for everyone else. They need to know someone sees their sacrifice." As they stood together in the afternoon sunlight, both Michelle and David felt the presence of Helen Morrison's love continuing to work in the world. Her simple words of understanding and compassion had created ripples that were still spreading, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. "Thank you, David," Michelle said as she prepared to go inside, "for your courage, for your mother's wisdom, and for reminding me that we're all just humans trying to help other humans. It's messy and beautiful and exactly what the world needs." David smiled broadly. "Thank you, Mrs. Obama, for showing me that my mother's love really does keep working, even after she's gone. She would be so proud to know that her words found their way to exactly the right person at exactly the right time." As Michelle walked into the White House, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility on her shoulders, but now it felt different, shared, understood, and somehow sacred. Helen Morrison's note remained in her purse, but its message had found a permanent home in her heart, reminding her daily that being human wasn't her weakness, it was her greatest strength.